Hi, welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Michael Dowse, a director whose films include It's All Gone Pete Tong, Take Me Home Tonight, Goon, and The F Word. He also wrote the screenplay for the recent remake of The Grand Seduction. His latest project finds him returning to the characters he first brought to the screen 15 years ago with actors David Lawrence and Paul Spence. FUBAR, Age of Computer, is a new series premiering on Viceland this Friday, November 3rd at 10:30 p.m. Mike picked Heaven's Gate, Michael Cimino's epic 1980 drama starring Chris Christopherson, Jeff Bridges, Isabelle Huppert, Christopher Walken, Sam Waterston, John Hurt, and, 1,000 other people. A western with the sprawl of a historical frontier epic, the film recreates the standoff in Wyoming's Johnson County in the early 1890s when cattle barons tried to drive immigrant families off desirable land. It did not end well, and Cimino, fresh off his Oscar wins for The Deer Hunter, was determined to tell that story with as much spectacle and gravitas as possible. The resulting film was received as a total disaster, only to gradually be embraced by critics and film buffs around the world decades later. Where does Mike come down on it? Just listen. This is Someone Else's Movie.
I really love that movie, and the first time I saw it, I was blown away by the scale of it and the artistry of it, and it had such a bad rap. And it had been so maligned by people. And then when I watched it, I just felt like this was the last of its kind, is that nobody makes movies like this anymore outside of maybe some obscure Bollywood movie that I don't know of that has this massive scale and budget. It had so many stories attached to it that were so negative that I was I felt like I needed to watch it just to experience it almost as a cautionary tale. But when I watched it, I was like, this is amazing. Like, this is incredible. It's so well shot. But the pure cinema of it and the pure scale of it, it's just such a big movie that I think everybody should see it at least once and experience. I mean, it's far from perfect. It's long. It's unwieldy at points. It's far from perfect, but they don't make films like this, and it's the auteur theory gone on steroids.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And it's the backstory is fascinating, but the actual story, I think, has aged very well. And when I watched it again recently for this thing, I was amazed at how the great American Western of the themes that he was talking about that probably weren't bubbling as much in 1979 are bubbling right now. It's basically, there's a lot of parallels to what's happening today in America, and I think this film would play. It would be even more controversial if it played today.
Yeah, it is. I was struck by that watching the documentary. I just went and caught back up to Final Cut, and was struck by how the same objections that everyone was making at the time you would make to any movie of that scale, but at the same time, the subject matter here makes it almost an inarguable mission. You would want this movie to be made now. You'd want somebody to be telling the story in this way. And I started thinking about how Deadwood kind of comes up to it as well, and that's, 15 years old now?
Yeah, it must be, yeah.
And Unforgiven almost engages with it, and I don't know
but not on the immigrant story, not on the... And that's what I think the parallel is today. It's just that, it's about how, at its essence, it's about how America should be accepting of immigrants, and that's what makes America amazing, and that's what made the West amazing. And Westerns aren't about that in a lot of times. They're about a bad guy in town, or and about justice in a very sort of simple sense of it, but not as complex as this. But the scale of it is insane. Like, I was watching it again, I'm like, you don't need the Harvard thing. I mean, it starts on 2,000 people dancing in Harvard and the
graduation ceremony.
And it establishes, initially I'm like, oh, do you need it? But then as I'm watching the movie and you get into this sort of beautiful, it has this sort of great, what's the term for it? Like a hypnotic sort of feel to it.
Yeah.
You get to know Chris Christopherson's character, and it actually does start to pay off. You know what I mean? So initially you're like, would you need that? Could you just start on him on the train showing up into town?
I mean, they did with the shorter version, right? The Johnson County War. I think that is actually where it opens.
Oh, it does.
Yeah,
right.
I've never seen it.
I've never seen that version. I'd be curious to see that version
of it. It felt to me, and I came to Heaven's Gate late also, just because, I mean, I remember I was in Toronto when it opened, when it was supposed to open, and I remember it was front page news that the marquee at the university had to be taken down when United Artists pulled it back. That ran on the front page of the Star. There were people carting it off because the studio recalled it, essentially, and decided it was a disaster before anyone ever saw it. So I approached it with this kind of gauze of shame, right? Like everybody had talked about it as this disappointment, and I don't think it was until the Laserdisc came out that it was in widescreen video. I never watched the pan and scan versions.
Jesus,
it was horrible, right? Like
atrocity.
I have seen the images, and they are not. They're not pretty because the visual sprawl is at least as important as the narrative sprawl. Just
for sure.
The fact that he is creating all of this, and this is the other thing you can't explain to people now, is that there is no CG. Like
there's
everything
no
you see
CG.
is real. He made that.
I was trying to think of other films of the same scale, and I thought of Titanic. No, after this that had been made. That's why I think it's one of the last of its kind. But even Titanic is so supplemented with CGI that I was like, there's not a fucking effect shot in that entire movie, and everything is built, and they just stopped making movies after that movie like this. It did bring down a studio. But it got shat on. The
hostility was unimaginable.
The fucking reviews are insane. How bad is Ebert's review? Let alone Canby's review is it rips the shit out of it. But Ebert, it's awful. He doesn't see the forest for the trees. I mean, it's crazy. He's ripping the colors. He's ripping the mix.
The decisions that are attributed to Cimino in the reviews that I've read are, yes, he had absolute control, and that's one of the problems with the film's existence, because he poisoned the well so much by the time that came out, no one could see it as anything other than one man's folly, even though the folly is a well-told story, self-contained and packaged. I remember trying to reconcile it while I was watching it and thinking, okay, this isn't the greatest movie ever made, but it's pretty good, and I think I like it more than The Deer Hunter, and I don't mind the length. And the more time I spent in it, the richer it became. Oh yeah,
for sure. That's the thing about it. It's, you can talk about the roller skating scene. There's all this sort of, there's a sense of movement in that movie, from the dancing to the roller skating scene to the chuck wagon, to literally circling the wagons at the end. That is so well captured, and a spirit to that movie that's crazy, and it's quite a simple story. In terms of what the people can take away from that, it's essentially a kill list. Yeah, that's a great sort of inciting incident for a movie. Mixed with a Jules et Jim sort of love triangle story, and it's epic. It's sprawling. It's rare where shots literally take my breath away, but it happens multiple times in this movie. Yeah. They just don't make it like it. And it's far, like I said before, it's far from perfect. You could argue that Chris Christopherson is a little wooden in the movie. I think Jeff Bridges is probably the best actor in that. You could argue that Isabelle Huppert is miscast. That's probably one of its fatal flaws in that thing, is that why, and they talk about this in Final Cut a lot, is why the hell is this Parisian actress in the middle of the Wild West running a brothel?
But it kind of, I can see, it's one of those things where I can see myself being talked into it in the moment. Because
100%.
She's an immigrant. Of course she's
exactly.
Yep. That works for the character.
And it also works for her being a central figure in a love triangle, that she has she is something that all the other girls don't, and
she's exotic, she's
exotic, she's unique,
and because she doesn't communicate very well necessarily, the men could be reading things into what she's doing and saying in a way that really plays to a masculine Western frontiersman kind of thing.
Yeah.
It works for the concept. It's just jarring to actually see it, which is weird, right?
It's a commitment to watch that movie.
Yeah.
But
So
you get into it. You sit back and you just let it sort of flow over you. And
what was your first experience of it?
I think I rented it and just watched it and was like, I got to watch, as a part of my sort of education of watching movies, I was like, I got to watch this movie. One of my other favorite movies is Thunderbolt and Lightfoot.
Oh, yeah.
Love that movie. I love the simplicity of the heist in that movie. And obviously the Deer Hunter is great. And then, you hear all these stories. And it was, I think, like a lot of movies that were introduced, I think I was first introduced to the Mad Magazine parody of the film.
Yeah.
and then...
people of a certain age.
You know what I mean? And then it was sort of in my mind. And then I wanted to watch it. And then I just was like, why do people hate this movie so much?
Yeah.
Like, it's like when you see literally 1,000 guys in full, like, Ukrainian immigrant outfits rolling across the prairie with snow-capped mountains, and you're like, it's beautiful. It's just beautiful.
Yeah.
And the scale of it is just crazy, and the train. That's the fatal flaw of the movie. Is that's what brought it down, was this attention to detail. Yeah. But the detail is amazing, and every time you watch it, you notice things like there's that shot of Jeff Bridges blowing whiskey or vodka into the turkey or into the cock's face.
Yes.
The chicken cock.
Yes.
For the cockfighting, even that cockfighting scene. And there's a great sense of humor to the movie as well.
Yeah, it's I'm trying to figure out how to explain it. I guess when you set yourself to constructing a myth, you got to go all in. Like, that's the thing that I love about the film, is that even though it has a lighter touch than people think, because all the photographs, all the images that were circulated were these gorgeous, composed, serious, burnished, Christopherson looking into the middle distance, or John Hurt looking weathered.
Yeah.
That's what people remember, but to sit through it is to actually live in it. It's a whole space. It's the same thing. I guess maybe that's why I think of Unforgiven too, because Eastwood had that weird dictum where you had to ride a horse into the set. He didn't want any sign of modernity, no wheel tracks, no anything.
Yeah.
And this,
but it's also shot very like it's Unforgiven is shot. And I'm from Calgary originally,
okay,
so it's shot in like 22X, just north of Waterton.
Okay,
and this is shot like by Kalispell in Montana, so it's very similar. Mountain ranges, very similar geography.
It's funny. I was in Calgary.
That's the film it reminds me of the most, for sure, is Unforgiven.
I went to Calgary for the first time, like last month, for the film festival.
Okay.
And I've never really understood the whole concept of the big sky.
Right.
But yeah, it goes on and on and on, and you look to the end of the streets in the middle of the city, and you can see sky at the end because the city just stops. And
in that area, like that's where they shot the opening of. The Shining is all shot in Glacier Mountain Park.
Okay.
That whole area.
The
helicopter footage is Glacier National Park, and I believe he shot it just on the other side by Kalispell, Montana.
It's amazing. So it's just a magnet for location work?
It's just stunning. It really is God's country. It's beautiful, and you can see why I'm surprised more people don't shoot there, but I think between those two films, they've pretty much owned that area of the world. In terms of shooting.
And they're certainly defining it as America in a really interesting way.
Yeah.
Given that it's not. But, that we do that all the time,
yeah.
Substitutions. But the sense that you're watching this town be carved out, that also brings me back to Deadwood, where, that spends, 30 hours all in on the creation of the American economy and the concept of the West giving way to capitalism. And Heaven's Gate packs that into 4 hours, takes a lot of it as read, and has the same impact just because it's angry about it. Like, Deadwood is resigned. There's that phrase, a lie agreed upon, where everybody, this is happening and we can't really stop it, so let's just roll with it. But Heaven's Gate is about the betrayal and the cynicism that created that space. And
it's also about the perversion of the American dream. Mm-hmm. It's about the establishment protecting it, and it's about what the true American dream is, which is sort of give me your tired and huddled masses. And it's about that colliding, and that is colliding even more so today. And so it becomes, I think it has even more context today, and it is even more interesting because it becomes a metaphor for America today, more so than it ever has been.
No, almost 40 years later, it's current.
It's probably the most current Western you could think of, and it's, but it's also like I mean, what else? I mean, just the stories of like what, like it has a mythology in itself. It's a stunning film that nobody will ever make in that scale again.
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of my problem with half these movies that are like $100 million films is that they spend all the money on effects and they don't do it practically. And I wonder if you tried to do these things as practically as possible, like what could you get away with? And so it just takes you out of the movie because you're like watching things that don't exist, that can't happen.
Yeah,
and in science fiction, you get away with a little bit more. But even that's what I thought was so great about Logan was that it grounded the superhero genre. And that's what this movie does because it's completely immersed in it because nothing is created. There are no effect shots. You are watching a town that he has built, and you're experiencing it, and you get to know every character. Is fully formed, and even all like sort of the mayor and the immigrant characters. You learn to care about them.
Yeah. Well, it's the space, right? The running time allows that.
Yeah.
You can see who. Well, I mean, thanks to the Harvard sequence, you can see who they were, and who they become almost immediately on arriving in the West. And then there's also everyone they ever interact with is given the same weight.
Yeah.
As you're saying, like there are no sketches.
Yeah, no,
because
exactly.
there's time to fill everything in.
Even the Sam Waterston character, you know, even a great villain and a great bad guy.
Yeah.
He's
a nice person, really.
He's just
like
he's just doing his job.
It's
he's
hard
just
to reconcile that
he's protecting what's his.
Yeah.
You know. And then the sequel. I mean, it literally has everything you'd ever want in a Western. You know, from circling the wagons at the end, and the cavalry comes in, and not to ruin it.
Yeah.
But I mean, what did you think of the ending? That's like, is it a dream? Is it, you know?
Oh, yeah. It's
when
that.
he's on the boat in Rhode Island, and you're like.
It's the ending of the one I think of is what came later with Once Upon a Time in America, another film that ends in an opium haze.
Right.
You know that it might all just be an idealized version of it. Like
do you think the wife's on opium?
I don't think so.
She's kind of lying there, though.
Yeah,
she does look a little like.
I think
whacked
Leone
out.
picked that up and ran with it.
Right.
But it gives you the out that there might be a better way. Like there might be a better ending for these people.
Yeah.
I don't think there is. I think that would go against the whole point of the film.
And I love that the composer Dave Mansfield is in the film, roller skating like a maniac. Like it's great. It's great. Like what? Like they. What I, you know, even like the little scenes like where he goes into a haberdashery right off the top, and then he punches out a bully off the top, but you get this sense that you're watching. The frames are so dense, and there's literally everything is so packed with people that you get a sense that you're watching like a still photograph from that time.
Oh, that's nicely.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
where you see, and there's just so much depth. Like if they all turned and smiled or posed and stopped. It would feel like one of those Old West like documentary photos, you know, of that time. But every single frame is perfectly packed. And what you find out from the documentary and the book is that part of the reason why it went over and why he got so behind was that he placed every single one.
Yeah.
So he would say, okay, you're back there. And so they would fall behind right away because he would spend literally 3 hours setting up a shot.
Yeah. I was sure that story was like by day 5 they were 4 days behind.
Yeah, $900,000 over.
I was sure that was someone exaggerating, and then you read the book and it's like, oh no, that was exactly what happened.
But he was no angel. There's that great story where they talk. Stephen Bach talks about why are we driving 2 hours to set? Like why aren't we shooting closer? And I think it's. And then he gets the legal to dig deeper on who they're paying the rent to, and they're paying it to Michael Cimino. He bought the land, and he was charging the production back on the money.
Again, we're in the present day with Trump and the Secret Service.
Yeah, you're right.
Else. Like,
I didn't even think about that about him.
It's just good business. That's just where you end up.
Yeah,
he predicted everything, but the sense of construction and the sense of it is. You could use it as the greatest expression of auteurism or the worst, because either way, one person is responsible for something. This object was created entirely through his force of will. You know, you get carte blanche after Best Picture. He made this movie. He did.
A week after Best Picture. He started they should just delay production like 6 weeks if anybody down the line should just come up with some excuse to pay for an extra 4 weeks of prep if they're ever in that situation again.
Just to come down a little bit.
Just to like
your way through it.
Let them.
But he created the film that there's no doubt in my mind that this is the movie he wanted to make.
Oh, for sure.
It is.
And what a crazy decision to make a film.
Yeah.
Like, he wanted to make the great American Western, and I think he accomplished that. I don't think there's a better Western. I mean, I'm a big fan of, there's Duel in the Sun, which I think is pretty close. It's pretty cool. It's got a lot of interesting things going on, how you shoot it, or how it's shot. I mean, I think the Unforgiven is close, but
Big fan of The Wild Bunch, I got to say.
Yeah, but even
it's
that...
angry. It's like...
It's angry, but it's
got
not...
that resignation and that anger that comes from...
But it's not immersive in the way...
That's true. It's stagey.
It's stagey.
It looks like it was shot in a studio lot.
Yeah, no, exactly. You know, you could say The Searchers is a little bit... But that's even... It's a little campy in terms of the John Wayne of it all and the performance.
And I wonder if that isn't what makes Heaven's Gate improve over time as an experience, because in 1980, it would have been received as people playing dress-up in a way that maybe now we're okay with, just because we've got a better sense of period texture and detail.
Yeah.
Because you're transitioning out of the 70s where everything was glossy and weird, and there's Coke sweat in the Westerns then because that's just was on set at the time. But now we're used to it, and everybody in it is sufficiently established that we won't have that moment of, oh, Jeff Bridges, he's that young guy. It's vintage. Now it's become its own record.
Yeah, for sure. It has become its own. That's a great way of putting it. And it's interesting when you listen to the actors talk about it, that we're in the middle of doing, 52 takes of the same thing. But uniformly, they all thought that he really just cared. He really just cared about what he was trying to do. And they were happy that somebody was around that cared.
Yeah.
And that's, you gotta, I just don't think, the closest parallel I think you can come up with recently would probably be, what's the DiCaprio movie? The guy won the best...
Revenant. Yeah.
The Revenant, where the guy won the best picture and then went off to shoot that. And that got big delays. And it didn't bring down the studio, but that's probably the closest in terms of the suffering. But it's a much different...
Yeah. But that's
a much different film.
It's self-inflicted suffering, too. The problem I have with The Revenant is that it is unnecessarily insistent on
right. It's just visceral.
Just look how cold
it's visceral
he is.
without it necessarily forwarding the story. It sort of spins its own visceral tires.
And at 2.5 hours long, you're just aware of how little story there is. There's just this burning motivation that just keeps coming back over and over again.
So you have seen the shorter version. I've never seen the shorter version.
No, I have seen images from it because I remember Fangoria did this special feature on the makeup effects for both films, but they were featured differently in Johnson County War. Huh. The cut plays up the violence at the end somehow.
Okay.
And I remember that was my initial understanding that there was a different version of it. It never made it out here. There is a tape. There was a VHS release somewhere, but I never saw it. I've read about the cuts, but I haven't experienced it.
And the Harvard thing was a pickup.
That was post?
That was like he'd shot the main stuff and then he demanded, like, even when they were 32 down, he was like, they shot in Oxford. He was like, I need another $5 million. And they were just like, they were all in already. So they're like, okay. But it does, pay off. Like I said, like the spinning of them and the joy of that thing juxtaposed with, the fight, the big scene at the end. He makes that visual parallel.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's sunk costs too, right? As you say, you might as well throw in another 5. Because
he's the horse they're going to ride, you know what I mean?
And he's just come off Deer Hunter and he's made Thunderbolt and Lightfoot. He's an established quantity.
Yeah.
I was trying to think of somebody else who might have been able to get away with something like this, and the only person I can think of is maybe Paul Thomas Anderson.
Today?
Yeah, now. George Lucas could probably do it because he'd self-finance it.
I think, Paul Thomas, as an and James Cameron is a guy, I think, but he built it. But he's like, it's so CG and it's so crazy. Do you know what I mean? It's like,
Well, I was watching Inherent Vice and thinking about it as
But I think of There Will Be Blood, and that's probably that can probably be up there with Unforgiven in terms of a Western that's immersive but also has that meditative sort of pace to it as well.
But he's working on that. Like that first 20 minutes is like 2001. He's working on a cosmic level of character study. And I think I don't know, I was trying to reconcile all the delicate CG and Inherent Vice that rebuilds the Hollywood of the 70s that never really, the LA of the 70s that doesn't exist anymore, but it's like people are walking through that space.
Yeah.
And then the nice guys did it too. Shane Black built the fake version of the 70s, which is amazing in its artifice. And those movies echoed to me because Heaven's Gate was being developed right around that time. It comes out of there. I guess.
Oh, yeah.
Because Cimino is running around in those worlds, really, at the time. We just don't see him. And I'm trying to build this weird parallel in my mind between people who work entirely in CG realms and create stuff with effects versus Cimino just going off and constructing it and shooting it because that was the only way he knew how. I think even now he would still insist on doing practical stuff.
For sure. I think, the only other director that comes to mind is obviously Kubrick in terms of, rebuilding the hotel and, and the maze, and he could dictate that stuff. But yeah, but the thing with Kubrick was that he kept his crew small, so he could shoot for 9 months and it wouldn't necessarily, he wouldn't go to 40 million. He doesn't have 1,000 people in the frame for 3 weeks at a time, which is what this movie is. And it's not, I think Cleopatra is probably the only current one, and now when you see it, it doesn't have any impact on me because it's all effects. Yeah, it's all just CGI people, and you don't care, and it doesn't bring you into that world.
Yeah, I keep waiting for someone to retell the story, to just have the ambition and hubris to get it right. I
used to joke that it should be remade. But you would get literally kicked out of any pitch you walked into. No executive will follow. But it would be even more timely today. And where is a film that takes on that immigrant story in that setting that gives it equal weight? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where it villainizes the great American capitalists.
Yeah, you can do it on the small scale the way James Gray did in The Immigrant.
Yeah.
But that's the only way in now because you just couldn't make it at the scale that it needs to be made.
Yeah. But also empowers the immigrants and for them to fight and to,
Yeah. The Immigrant, the James Gray movie is a small victory of a single person walking away.
Yeah.
This is different.
This is much different.
A different scale.
And he was, all those people are riding those horses around. Like, Isabelle Huppert is riding that fucking carriage. She is, like, riding the horse. I'm surprised more people didn't die. And we don't have, like, more, like, Twilight Zone stories of that movie because what the fuck they're doing is crazy.
Yeah, the horses were not treated well.
The horses were not treated well. But there's details of his filmmaking. Like, there's this scene where when all the immigrants run in and they all come over a bridge and one of the carriages crashes. And there's just a little moment where you see the guy trying to get his wife or his son, I can't remember what it was, out from the carriage. And he just finds these moments that a lot of filmmakers don't take the time to humanize these things. Like how many times have we seen chuck wagons crash or people crash and the horses, but to have that moment where you see somebody struggling to pull out somebody and it's not a big character, it's just one of the townsfolks, you know what I mean? But it's actually quite a touching moment and it speaks to how tough those times were and like how quickly people could just die in accidents and stuff like that.
Yeah, as soon as you started talking about that, my immediate thought was, this is a story he's going to tell whatever surviving family members. Generations from now, they'll tell this story.
Yeah.
And with us, it's just a glimpse. It's just something we're passing.
Yeah, but he does give you the time to focus on it, as well as, just the moment where the one woman shoots herself after she loses, puts a gun to her head and it's such a crazy movie. I wish I would pay money to see it in a theater again, for sure, like a fresh print.
I keep hoping that the Lightbox will program the 70mm print. They must still have one. There must be one somewhere.
Or the neg's got to be somewhere in a vault somewhere.
Or even just a digital. There's a 4K restoration now for the Criterion disc. I think it was 4K, wasn't it?
Great, so that'll do.
Travel.
That'll do.
Yeah.
That's fine.
We'll see what we can do.
Yeah.
But what you said about giving the smallest characters presence and meaning gets me to the final question because we're about to wrap up. But the moment I'm thinking of now is Sarah Gadon's scene in The F Word where we get everything about her character in, 3 minutes?
Yeah.
And the script allows her the space and the movie allows her the opportunity to refute all of the ideas we've built up about her because we've only heard about her rather than seen her. And suddenly you just see, oh no, she's a person, she's hurt, she's moving on.
Yep.
And she's sorry that things didn't go very well, but at least she has full representation in the movie.
Yeah.
So is there something else that you've kind of used or borrowed or stolen from Heaven's Gate in your work? That
I wish I could steal more from Heaven's Gate.
I want you to tell me that there was an entire wagon train sequence that was cut out.
Yeah, no, I wish.
Goon or something.
I wish I could get 1,000 extras. And no, I think for me the thing I take away visually, it's more a visual thing. it's how beautiful that sense of movement is in that just that sense of joy and love that they have in the how much fun the roller skating scene is. Do you know what I mean? And how he uses the camera in the dance scene in Harvard, where he's moving the camera, they're spinning, they're moving. I mean, that was my big visual takeaway, was just how beautiful that is, and also the just a sense of landscape in that movie. Like, you just gotta shoot your wides, shoot wide, let it breathe, and let it sink in. Kind of like oh God, what's the Von Trier film? Where it's all just fucking brutal handheld,
scope.
and then he cuts to wides and just lets it sing. The fucking
Is it Breaking the Waves?
Breaking the Waves. Yeah. You know what I mean? Where it's just let it sort of sit and let it, and just the careful construction of the shots. I mean, one of the most famous shots is the introduction of Christopher Walken's character, which is it's such a great shot. You know, and just thinking, how can I tell this story and introduce this character with tension and just sort of grab people. And that's Cimino, that's his filmmaking.
Yeah. Plus, it's just the pure Walken that you get, right? Like, this is an actor who is committed completely because he's worked with him. He knows what he's going to get out of it.
Yeah.
And he is just he's magnetically horrible.
Let alone Deer Hunter, you know.
But even then, he's hollowed out halfway through. He's playing a husk.
Yeah.
And in Heaven's Gate, he's playing someone who has a full life. You just don't want to be anywhere near it.
And I wonder if... I mean, I like Chris Christopherson as an actor, but I can't help but think, what if De Niro was that character? And what would, because he's great in the film, obviously, but there is a woodenness to him, you know, and I think it's one of the faults of the movie. It's hard to say that because he is in the movie and he is part of it, but when you think of Deer Hunter and just how much he owns that movie and how amazing he is.
Would it have been too contemporary in energy, though? De Niro in period, I mean, yes, you have Godfather 2, but for the most part, when he's...
you need that sort of classic Western face of Christopherson or an Eastwood.
He's weathered as a young man in a way that maybe De Niro would have read 270s or 2...
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I was trying to figure out who else could... It's a little game that I play. If you remake something in period, who would you have remade it with at the time?
Yeah.
And Christopherson, he's a limited actor, but I think Cimino uses it in an interesting way, especially when he's around Dupere.
Yeah, there's definitely
they're feeling each other out all the time, even if he's not acting that.
And he definitely embodies, he's a very righteous character, and he definitely, embodies that, you know, in a good way.
Yeah, he's got a, steel plate in his back.
Yeah,
exactly.
He
walks like he has a ruler or something on him at all times.
Yeah, for sure.
Hard to explain. But, it's worth reinvestigating just to see how he would have...
Everybody who makes films should be watching this movie and don't believe the hype about how bad it is, because it really is a masterpiece. It's one of the last masterpieces, I think, where it's at that scale. It's a tip to that old style of filmmaking that has gone away and has gone into effects houses.
All right. Well, I hope we've pulled some people towards it with this.
Yes,
that would be
absolutely.
Nice. My thanks to Michael Dowse, whose new series FUBAR, Age of Computer, premieres on Viceland this Friday, November 3rd at 10:30 p.m. If you've been wondering what Terry and Dean have been up to, well, you're going to find out. You can find Mike on Twitter at mdowse, all one word, and you can find the director's cut of Heaven's Gate on Blu-ray and DVD in a lovely restoration from the Criterion Collection. I was wrong about the 4K thing. Apparently it's just a standard HD restoration, but it looks pretty good. It's also available on iTunes. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com. You can also find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. If you want to leave a review up on iTunes or Apple Podcasts or Google or wherever, that would be greatly appreciated. Giddy up. Thanks for listening.